We are back for another episode of Forecast Lab. Things are getting quite active, both in the tropics and in the extratropical latitudes as well. Let us start out with the tropics. Some of you viewers with sharp eyes probably saw that storm spinning around west of Mexico. That is Hurricane Priscilla, 110-mile-an-hour winds, making that an upper-end Category 2 storm approaching the Baja Peninsula. It's forecast to gradually weaken and make landfall in northern Baja California Sunday. The moisture field will be torn off the storm starting tomorrow and Thursday, and that will slam into the southwestern U.S. over the next few days. We'll discuss the details of that shortly, but for now, the southern tip of Baja California under tropical storm warnings. Joining us in the Atlantic is Tropical Storm Jerry. Winds 50 miles an hour, newly formed. It had a 1003 millibar pressure and was moving west at 23 miles an hour. The current forecast is for strengthening, however, it will avoid most land masses, just grazing the Leeward Islands and passing well east of Bermuda this weekend. The Atlantic Basin charts from the GFS shows Tropical Storm Jerry right there. We take that into Thursday and Friday. It moves right along and barely misses those islands. There's Bermuda circled in yellow, and it's going to pass east of there, and we do get some bear clinic development off the east coast. That's an extratropical system associated with a front. We'll see that later on the frontal chart sequence. And as we go into next week, things clear out. One tropical wave moving along the same track as Jerry, but nothing from that. And just some extratropical stuff, maybe subtropical going on between Bermuda and the East Coast. And that's pretty much it all the way through 240 hours. Let's take a look at that surface analysis. How do we view this as a meteorologist would? That's one question I get from time to time. So just, taking the big picture, what do we see here? What jumps out at us is this high-pressure area in the northern plains. This represents a large mass of cold air that extends all the way from Quebec and Ontario back to the Rockies. And some of that extends into the Great Basin area as well. Down to the south, tropical air. Look at the dew points. The dew points are a good tracer of source regions, so we can see lots of 60s from Virginia to Texas and maybe even into Maine. So this is all one homogeneous air mass. A little bit more warmth down to the south, but it is all the same air mass. In Arizona, we do have some dry air, so I might be looking for a dry line. You could probably put one in this area. And out to the west, this is kind of a nondescript air mass. So we have this warm air advection region interacting with the front, so we have numerous showers and storms throughout the Appalachians. The rest of the country, scattered precipitation across Texas and that tropical air mass, and up to the north, fair, dry, and cool. This time of year, the polar front jet becomes very important. We're looking at a 250 millibar chart, which is up at about 34,000 feet at jet stream level. And this shows the polar front jet across Canada. Very little of it extending into the U.S. We do have this southern stream. This is not part of the primary polar front jet belt, but this will become active over the next few days. As this upper level low shears off the Pacific Northwest coast, we see the flow pick up to 80 knots across the southwestern U.S., and we will see increasing frontogenesis across Arizona as that moisture comes up from Priscilla. So things are starting to become active in that part of the country. Ridging across the central U.S., and along that ridge and downstream, we tend to see fair weather. So it will remain that way for the next few days. As we go into Friday and the weekend, we finally see this trough starting to make its way into the Great Basin area and into the Rockies. So increasing bad weather across much of the western U.S. and for the start of the week in the North Plains. And we see an intense band by Monday of 110 knots across Colorado into Nebraska and a high meridional pattern. Look at that, just waving up and down. So this explains the decrease in the North Atlantic Oscillation, the Arctic Oscillation as well. This is kind of a blocky pattern. And as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, some of the jet energy moves out into the Midwest, the Great Lakes. And look at that belt right there, almost 150 knots flowing into British Columbia. So they're going to get hammered by some Pacific storm systems going into next week. In the northeastern U.S., another warm day along the coast from Washington, D.C. to New York City, up into Maine, 80s. Yesterday, we saw 84 at Burlington, Vermont, 83 at Montpelier, and in Caribou, Maine, 83, all of those records for the date. The 83 at Caribou broke the record of 74 set in 1946, and it tied the all-time October maximum temperature. But a massive change on the way from the west as this large baroclinic cloud structure associated with a cold front advances into the northeast. Quite a bit of rain associated with this due to a large warm advection pattern, and we see showers and thunderstorms starting to exit West Virginia and approaching much of Maryland and the Washington, D.C. area. The 850 millibar severe weather composite, not only useful for severe weather, but also for extensive convective precipitation. This is 850 millibars, 5,000 feet, so this is the lower troposphere. The green represents the moisture, roughly synonymous with the dew point. And you see this 10 gram per kilogram area, that's going to be the richer tropical moisture. The front itself advancing like that at 850 millibars. It's usually a little bit further ahead at the surface. And you can see basically this whole area right here. This is a good region for convective weather along and ahead of that front. Not much of a low-level jet, but there is a stout southwest flow at 25 to 30 knots. Across the southeastern U.S., a tropical weather regime. The front just to the north in this area here. Temperatures were mostly in the 80s, the exception Tampa and Tallahassee, both those areas, expecting 90 degrees, and we do pick up low 90s across much of Louisiana. Texas continued its streak of hot weather, low to mid 90s in the big cities. Yesterday, Brownsville, way down to the south, they reached 96, and McAllen 100 degrees, both of those records for the date. But there is cold air advancing southward. You can see the change in the air mass right there as cooler air flows southward. Looking for 70s this afternoon in Oklahoma City and Lubbock, 60s at Amarillo and Woodward, and 50s in the Oklahoma Panhandle. A marginal risk of severe storms does cover parts of western and central New Mexico. Looks like they've, that's going to be right there around Albuquerque, Klein's Corner, down to almost Roswell. They are expecting the possibility for damaging winds and large hail. And we did point out that frontal boundary extending roughly like that with a pseudo dry line south through about Deming from truth or consequences. So maybe a little sort of triple point in that area. We do see a few storms popping up there around maybe just south of Albuquerque, and those will advance northeastward through the afternoon and evening. In the northern plains, northwesterly flow and drier air. It definitely felt like fall, highs in the 60s and some 50s in the Lake Superior region and in northern Minnesota. We do have a frost and freeze advisory across much of the western and the western Great Lakes into northern Minnesota. Basically everywhere north of Green Bay, Stevens Point, and St. Cloud, they are under a freeze warning. Temperatures could be down into the 20s. The Rockies enjoying some cooler weather, and we see cloud fields consistent with upslope flow patterns. That's when we get easterly flow into the higher elevations of the plains, and it banks up against the front range, like what you see right there, and very little cloud cover in the mountains themselves. Highs today around 60 in Denver, 55 at Colorado Springs, 50s and 60s in the mountains and in the Salt Lake City area. It warms up into the 70s in the Four Corners area. The Southwest deserts continued hot with upper 90s, And we see upper 80s and low 90s through California in the Inland Empire and the San Joaquin Valley. Downtown Los Angeles expecting 79, San Francisco 82. Mild conditions in place across the Pacific Northwest, highs in the 60s and 70s. The exception at Medford, Oregon, always in the furnace there with 84. And we saw 50s and 60s in the Bitterroots. A freeze warning has been issued for parts of eastern Idaho for tonight, including Pocatello. Idaho Falls and Rexburg, temperatures will fall as low as 27. And we have a frost advisory extending west almost to Twin Falls. Heading west into Alaska. Well, we passed this first frontal boundary. There's a good chunk of cold air across southeastern Alaska. Then we pick up some modified tropical air across the Aleutians. Look at that temperature, almost 60 degrees. That's probably barbecue weather for those people. A very deep low in the Bering Sea. We have storm warnings all through this area as a major cyclone with 963 millibar pressures lifts north into the tip of Russia. Southwest winds, 45 knots expected with seas to 26 feet. We have high wind warnings in the mountains of the Alaskan interior. Tonight through Thursday, southwest winds gusting to 50 miles an hour. Regular wind advisories in the valleys. And we have coastal flood warnings all through northwestern Alaska. Water levels will be 4 to 6 feet above the normal high tide line. That's due to strong west-northwest winds coming in all the way through Friday. Water levels, even in Barrow, expected to be 2 to 4 feet above high tide. In Canada, we see that switch into winter. 16 degrees at Resolute, 18 at Rhea Point, 14 at Eureka. So yeah, we are definitely getting into the icebox up north. Across the Canadian prairies, cool weather, warm temperatures found in Calgary and Edmonton with near 70 degrees. In eastern Canada, cool and rainy all through Montreal up the St. Lawrence River Valley. And we return to warm weather in the Maritimes, 82 there on the Gaspé Peninsula, 82 at Bathurst, and 70s found through Nova Scotia into Newfoundland. Okay, we've got some changes coming up, and the chart that I'm going to drag out here is the precipitable water. We're going to watch the southwestern U.S. as moisture, not only from Hurricane Priscilla, but also being advected north, kind of a recharging of the monsoon pattern. All of that is going to shift northward, and also some increasing baroclinicity across Arizona, and that's going to come to a head on Thursday. So there's Thursday afternoon, 1.5 to 2 inch precipitable water in southwestern Arizona, and that will hit the higher terrain along the Mogollon Rim into the northern, I should say the Four Corners Plateau region. So all of that area will be getting increasing rain. The monsoon graphics, rather useful. Here's the current chart. We've got high pressure in the mid-levels across Texas, with a southeasterly flow into the southwest. Dew points in the 20s and 30s, and actually the 50s there in New Mexico. So this circulation is going to accelerate the impact of that monsoon pattern, kind of key it up a little bit, and then the moisture field itself will be adding to the mix. So a lot of stuff going on starting on Thursday, Wednesday night into Thursday, and increasing baroclinicity in this region, so some frontal dynamics start becoming involved as well. So looking at an active pattern Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And some areas will see a reprieve, but looks like a second wave, possibly around Monday and possibly Tuesday. Dew points still in the 60s, strong monsoon flow, and remnants of that hurricane, and gradually by Tuesday it looks like we'll start to see some improvement, although this is going to be kind of a long duration, deep southerly flow event. So some of this may continue well into next week. Let's take a look at the precipitable water in terms of percentiles for this time of year. We go into Wednesday and Thursday. Look at Arizona there. This cyan is the all-time high in the data set for this time of year. And this starts out Thursday at midday, expands into Friday. I don't think I've ever seen any of this cyan color across such a wide area over such a long duration. So this is certainly going to be a significant event, and you can see 99th percentiles all the way into Wyoming, western Colorado, and the Four Corners area. So this will have major impacts late this week. And there is Saturday. It continues. And by Sunday, it looks like it starts ramping down. And then we're going to see probably a second surge for Monday. You can see it just south of the border there, out around Douglas and Nogales, and advancing into southeastern Arizona and New Mexico. So that could be where some of the major impacts are for midweek next week. Let's look at those high temperatures for today. Very cold up there in Minnesota, 50s. That cold air will spread into the Great Lakes area. And then for Thursday into the northeastern U.S., 50s all the way down to New York City, State College, and Erie. Warming up for Friday, and then we see some very warm weather in the Central Plains, 80s, all the way up to Rapid City. Very cold weather in the northwestern U.S., and that will advance across Montana, Wyoming, and Utah. Lots of 40s and 50s for high temperatures. Even cooler from Monday, 42 at Butte, 46 for Great Falls, and 39 for Yellowstone Park. Overnight lows for tonight, 25 at International Falls. That will also spread eastward for Thursday and Friday. Some areas will get down to freezing around Albany and Binghamton for early Friday. And then Saturday, cold air coming in from the Pacific Northwest. By Monday, lows in the teens in Yellowstone Park and lots of 20s in the higher elevations of Montana. Precipitation chances shift eastward through the remainder of tonight into tomorrow, and then by later tomorrow we should see some improvement across all of the northeastern U.S. Rain chances pick up for Thursday in Arizona and in the Pacific Northwest. Best chances will be around Flagstaff all the way up to Moab and Grand Junction. That's on the higher terrain with slightly lower chances down to the south, but still about a 50-50 shot at Phoenix. I have a feeling they're going to be bringing that up. So we got 60% for Phoenix on late Friday, and gradually everything shifts to the west. Continued rainy in the Pacific Northwest, almost 100% chances over the weekend. And there's your depiction for Monday. All right, let's put the maps into motion. Starting out with tonight, very rainy in the northeastern U.S., and you'll see that clear out through the day tomorrow. By tomorrow afternoon, looking like this, large high-pressure area across the Great Lakes with a significant influence down to the Gulf and into the Carolinas. High rain chances along and west of the Cascades with that new frontal system right there, which will gradually organize going into the weekend. Here is that front that I talked about. This did show up on the Q-vector charts. We went over that yesterday in the supporter video and showed the frontogenetic forcing out there on the Q-vectors. And looks like by Thursday evening, there it is, a little frontal system. And down to the south, there is the remnants of the surface circulation of Priscilla. So, yeah, quite a mess out there in the southwestern U.S., and then we have this Pacific system now starting to advance towards that precipitation area. So a lot of stuff coming together all at once. The southern system, that appears to be gradually moving out into New Mexico for Saturday. This one also close on its heels. And this is kind of how it comes together. Also on the East Coast, a little bit of a warm season nor'easter, if you want to call it that. And we go into Sunday. Now we start to see Canadian air flowing south. One thing that I did not point out is that there is a low-level jet which will get set up Saturday night. So that could bring a lot of moisture up into the northern plains. Maybe a chance of severe weather. I don't know exactly how the ingredients are going to work out. We're going to have to return to that on Friday and look at that closer. Anyway, the Canadian air will come south somewhat, but here comes another Pacific weather system. Meanwhile, that little nor'easter there on the coast, moving out to sea again by Tuesday. Now we have a large Great Plains system for midweek that lifts up into Minnesota and into the Lake Superior area. And then finally, by late week, things calming down with high pressure across much of the country. And that will be all for this edition of Forecast Lab. Remember, your Patreon support is important. And if you can't provide support on Patreon, head to weathergraphics.com and pick up a copy of a book. That'll be much appreciated. All right, we'll see you back here on Friday for another edition. Bye-bye.